Hey everyone! Welcome back for part 2 of our Women's History Month tribute series. If you missed out on part 1, where we discussed some background about the women's suffrage movement, the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, and 3 suffragists and civic leaders from right here in the village of Ilion, then make sure to go check it out on our YouTube channel. Today, we're picking up where we left off by highlighting 7 more historically significant women. We consider the women in this video to be activists, administrators, prominent educators, or medical and library pioneers. This is the last part of the series, so without further ado, let the history lesson begin. So in our part 1 video, we talked about our first group of women, the suffragists and civic leaders of Ilion. Today, we're going to start with our next group, the activists and administrators. First up is Catherine, or Kate Coffin. Her story was actually similar to Margaret Ballinger's from our Part 1 video. Coffin was president of Ilion's Political Equality Club alongside Ballinger and wasn't afraid to have her voice heard. She was instrumental in organizing the group in the first place and was also an active member in the Women's Christian Temperance Union. In 1895, she was elected school trustee for District 3, which was part of North Ilion back then. She ended up defeating incumbent H. Wendell in a hotly contested and disputed election. We actually found a newspaper clipping about this from October 18, 1895. In an article titled, "The Lady Beats the Man," which you can see here, State Superintendent C.R. Skinner declares Miss Catherine Coffin the winner of the election with 15 votes to Wendell's 10 after a thorough investigation. According to the article, Wendell made a stink by claiming there was some sort of illegal voting going on and that the ballots only stated the names of the candidates to vote for and did not include the title of office the candidates were running for. It turned out that 5 people voted that weren't supposed to, but even when their votes were withdrawn, Coffin still won the election with 11 votes to Wendell's 9. And there was only one trustee position open at the time, so there was no need to include the title of office on the ballots because there was only one thing to vote for. But hey, Wendell had a moment and the press decided to report about it. And now, because of that, we know something more about Catherine Coffin's career. So it was a hot topic in the school district then, but it's a piece of history in our collections now. That's just an example of why we archivists and historians love the press and reading old local newspapers. They reported on so much of the day-to-day activities and ongoings of residents and locations around town that changed over time that we can usually always find some breadcrumbs or clues when we're researching a topic or trying to find out more info than we might have in our files. Next up, we have the educated lady, Loreta Douglas. When she was a little girl in 1871, her family moved to Little Falls and she graduated from Little Falls Academy. She then went on to attend college at Cortland State College, Cornell University, Syracuse University, and Wesleyan University in Illinois, while she majored in languages, studied public speaking, and earned her PhD. After that, she started her career in Cazenovia, then relocated to Stanford, and eventually settled in at Ilion Academy in 1892 as the Latin and Greek teacher. These photos of her are from 1919 and 1944, during her teaching career and after her retirement. Her career in education spanned 46 years, and one of our favorite quotes we found from her in our records came from a 1944 article from the Utica Observer-Dispatch, in which she recalled her early years of her career and commented on the career paths of women during the late 1800s. She said, and I quote, "Girls then hadn't much choice among professions. Teaching was about the only ladylike ambition a girl could entertain." Now, keep that quote and her choice of words in your head for a minute while I tell you more. Loreta Douglas was eventually promoted to being the head of the English department, and later became the school principal, a position she held for 14 years until she left in 1920 to work at the Utica Free Academy until she retired in 1930. So she was a very educated lady in a time when she's implying that gender-based social expectations limited women's career paths or resulted in them being ostracized. She was very good at what she did, though. As a teacher, she never had a failing student, and while she was principal, Ilion Academy's Regents record was the second best in the entire state of New York, and the school was ranked as the fourth best school statewide for its thoroughness in preparing high school students for college. From what we can tell in our records, Loreta Douglas didn't strike us as a suffragist or an activist that was supporting some bigger political agenda or local organization, but she was an influencer. As a teacher, she spent more than 4 decades in what she deemed was a ladylike position at the time, but she spent her time teaching her students moral values and trying to instill in generations of Ilion students and alumni the significance of citizenship, patriotism, having duties and responsibilities, and upholding one's obligations. She taught her students right from wrong, and when she was a guest speaker at an Ilion alumni banquet in 1935, she said, and I'm going to quote her again, "The abiding joy of my life is my alumni. I would like to see the boys and girls of Ilion High become a real power for good in the village, the state, and the nation." Douglas was that teacher that everyone loved for years. She followed a career path that was typical of women at that time and earned her way up the professional ladder into a leadership role in the education field. Her greatest tools were having a good personal education, having the decades to work with multiple generations of Ilion kids, and the values she taught her students and ultimately infused into society as they all graduated and grew up. Alright, our last lady in this group is Jane Douglas. She was nicknamed the Government Girl from Ilion, and she also went by the names Jenny and Jeanette. And no, there's no relation to Loreta Douglas. She just happens to have the same name. Jane Douglas was originally from Peterborough, New York, where she was the next-door neighbor and close friend of the well-known philanthropist and abolitionist Gerrit Smith. She later relocated to Ilion and lived on the corner of Old Forge Road and Beringer Road, which is how she got onto our list of women for this video. She became the first female Treasury clerk in the U.S. government in 1862 after Gerrit Smith recommended her to the U.S. Treasurer at the time, General Francis E. Spinner, who was appointed by none other than President Abraham Lincoln. If you're familiar with the name Spinner, it's because he was a local too. He lived in Mohawk, and there's a statue of him in Myers Park in Herkimer. Shortly before the start of Douglas's government career, she was a teacher at a school that closed right as the Civil War began. That was also the same time frame when greenbacks, or simple paper money, began being printed for the first time in the U.S. Printing paper money created a new demand to hire workers to physically cut apart the newly printed sheets of paper cash. There was no automatic machine around to do that back then, so it was done manually with shears. At the same time, most of the male workforce was enlisting in the army to fight, so there was a labor shortage, and that opened a door for women to step into these new government jobs that were typically reserved for men. Francis Spinner recommended the idea of hiring women to fill the roles since they weren't allowed to enlist and they could also be paid less than men. The consensus was that this was a good idea while the men were away fighting and that it would save the government money in the long run. Jane Douglas just happened to know the right people and be in the right place at the right time that she got the job. In a newspaper article from our collection, Douglas was described as, quote, "a great, tall, double-fisted girl that physically and mentally was more than a match for any of the men in the room." It's an interesting statement when you break it down. It implies this notion that compared to a man, Jane Douglas's ability to do the job was no different, and yet women got the lower wage and the government tried to profit from that wage gap. In any case, the idea backfired when prices soared because of inflation caused by too much money being printed. Then, to combat this new economic issue, taxes were levied on incomes, along with popular goods like liquor, playing cards, tobacco, and jewelry. But hey, women got federal jobs out of it. Once Jane Douglas was hired, other female government clerks were hired too. Here's a typed letter from Francis Spinner that we found that basically highlights everything I just said. Spinner takes some pride in talking about the idea that his own daughters could potentially work for the government, and that he felt good about recommending women to fill government jobs. He took it as an accomplishment in his life and career. He also talks about nominating 7 other women as additional clerks following Douglas's employment in this letter. Now, I also want to point out that when you read this letter all the way through, from start to finish, and take it in, the language implies that women can do this type of work better and faster than men in some cases, and that by putting women in these roles, men can handle guns instead of the shears being used to cut the money. This is Spinner's language, not mine. But remember what I said about Loreta Douglas, and then look at the date of this letter in the top right corner. July 13, 1886. This letter was written in that same era when Loreta Douglas, the school teacher, was in her early teaching days talking about ladylike and unladylike career paths. Cutting cash and the Civil War labor shortages opened this door for women to step into government jobs. But there's still this mindset in 1886 that there's a difference between women's work and men's work, although in this case it didn't involve teaching. Changing that general mindset over time was the challenge, and I think it was something the entire women's suffrage movement was trying to tackle because, remember at the beginning of this video, I mentioned the first Women's Suffrage Convention at Seneca Falls and the goals they set in their Declaration of Sentiments. They wanted women to get the right to vote, but they also wanted legal equality between the sexes. So again, here's this letter as an example of the U.S. government praising women and giving them what was considered previously as men's work, and yet there's still this mindset about gender-based role expectations. It's an interesting dichotomy, but that's how it was at that time in history, and that's what all these women in this video and in the whole movement were up against. It's also worth mentioning that Jane Douglas had a very mysterious personal life outside her government career as well. These are some more newspaper clippings we found about her in chronological order from left to right. It looks like in 1852, before she moved to Ilion and was employed by the government, there was something that happened in the Supreme Court about a trial case concerning her and somebody named Eliphalet Aylesworth about a breach of promise of marriage. We don't know if they were betrothed or engaged, and maybe he decided to break it off and she wasn't happy about that, or what, but there was something going on there. Then we have these 2 other clippings that talk about her traveling abroad to Scotland in the late 1860s to tend to some property she'd inherited, and then returning in the 1870, where she supposedly got off a boat in New York City. She wrote to her brother when she returned, saying she was planning to come back home to Ilion, and then she just disappeared and went missing. She never turned up or came home. Her family never heard anything else about her, and they were freaking out, not knowing if she'd been mugged, murdered, kidnapped, or if she'd committed suicide. Her disappearance turned into a cold case after they still hadn't heard anything years later in 1887, in the last clipping here on the right that's an obituary for her brother. And now we're on to our second group of ladies. We're bringing things home to end this series by rounding out this video with some prominent ladies that tie back to our very own library's history and the Ilion Hospital. First up in this group is Jennie Richardson. Richardson graduated from Ilion Academy in 1878 and pursued a degree at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. She attended with her sister Carrie, and they both transferred to Smith College later. After college, she returned home and became a Latin and history teacher at Ilion High School. 2 years later, she took a better job as principal at a school in South Newark, Connecticut. But by 1889, she decided that teaching wasn't for her, and she decided to pursue medicine instead. That year, Jennie entered medical school at the Women's Medical School of the New York Infirmary in New York City. That school had just been formed a few decades earlier by Emily and Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female doctors in America who sought to make pursuing medical school easier for women until other men's-only med schools began allowing more women to practice medicine. By 1892, Jennie Richardson earned her medical degree and was interning in an outpatient infirmary during one of New York City's worst epidemics of measles that hit the city in 1893. She was dedicated to her work helping people. From what we know from our collections, she was pulling a couple 63-hour shifts and making house calls and night calls in some of New York City's slums. In one newspaper clipping we found, she said, and I quote, "I had no reason to be afraid because my medical bag was my badge, and everyone respected it." When I read this for the first time, I just thought of Jenny as if she was one of the nuns from the series Call the Midwives, getting a call that someone needed help, and then dashing out the door in uniform with her medical bag and bike, although Jenny wasn't English or a nun, and she didn't specialize in any particular field of medicine. She believed that becoming a good general doctor first was more important than specializing, but she did have a particular interest in ears, nose, and throat medicine. She continued med school at the Roosevelt Hospital and later opened her own practice. In the early 1900s, Jenny Richardson came home for a while to be with her family after her father died, although she still traveled back and forth to New York City to oversee her practice clinic. In 1902, she approached local school administration in Ilion and advocated for better standards in maintaining the health and well-being of children in the local school system. In 1905, she moved home permanently after closing her clinic to help her sister Carrie care for their sick mother. In 1906, she was involved locally in several clubs around town. She was a member of the Ilion Travelers Club and served as its president briefly. She became a charter member for the Ilion Shakespeare Club, and she also got involved with the Ilion Alumni Association. In 1908, she joined a committee petitioning Ilion's Board of Education about the importance of hiring a music teacher for the first time for the school. Music was a passion of the Richardson family. Jenny and Carrie both knew how to sing and play several instruments, and they would host music groups at their family home. So it was important to them that music became something that was part of children's education in Ilion. Jenny didn't forget her love of medicine after she came home, though. During World War I, she served on the Medical and Hospitals Committee of the Herkimer County Home Defense Committee, and she volunteered with the Red Cross. In 1906, she helped found and incorporate the Ilion Hospital, supporting the efforts of its primary founder, H. Benedict, from the well-known Remington Standard Typewriter Company. Jenny Richardson served as president of the Ilion Hospital Women's Association Board for almost 40 years, helping to raise funds to buy medical supplies for the hospital. She also became chairwoman of the 5th Federated Women's Club and one of the oldest members of the New York Medical Society. Now let's talk about Carrie Richardson, Jenny's older sister, because she was also a local civic leader in Ilion. Carrie graduated from Ilion Academy in 1878 as valedictorian and then went on to attend Wellesley College and Smith College with Jenny. After that, she went on to study physics and biology and finished college in 1886. She became a substitute teacher at Ilion and later became chair of the science department at Elmira Free Academy. In 1892, she joined the Federated Women's Club, the Ilion Shakespeare Club, and became a charter member and president of the Ilion Travelers Club, which was founded that same year. Remember how I said the Richardson family had a passion for music? Well, Carrie was a member of the Mohawk Valley Madrigal Club in 1899, which performed at Mabon's Opera House right here in Ilion. She also hosted a Monday music club at their family home, where Jenny and her other sister, Lillian, were also members. They also appealed to the Ilion Board of Education to encourage them to hire a music teacher and served as a committee member that awarded prizes to graduating seniors seeking to attend college. Carrie Richardson was also an advocate for poor, homeless, and lonely women, so she was very involved with the Old Ladies' Home of Herkimer County, or what is now called the Mohawk Homestead, located in Mohawk. She served as its treasurer and was a member of the board of directors for more than 18 years. She was a significant figure in helping raise funds for an addition to the building in 1906, and she helped organize fairs and fundraisers to support its efforts. In 1914, Carrie Richardson was elected president of the Ilion Welfare Association, which aimed to create a hospital for tuberculosis patients. She was also appointed as a permanent member of the Ilion Hospital Association that her sister Jenny was a part of. And just like her sister, Carrie also aided the Red Cross. She was elected chairman of the Home Service Committee and handled war risk insurance for local soldiers. Carrie also worked with the Ilion Travelers Club to sell Red Cross ribbon seals that helped raise money to hire a visiting nurse for Ilion and to provide relief funds for destitute war orphans overseas in France and Belgium. In 1920, she was appointed as a public notary to help World War I veterans. Carrie wasn't a doctor like her sister Jenny, but she loved music, and she came across us as someone that loved helping people in any way she could. And if that wasn't enough, Carrie Richardson was also a member of the Ilion Alumni Association that helped set up our very own Ilion Free Public Library. Carrie's father, Thomas Richardson, was the lawyer that helped draft the deed allowing women to serve on our first library board, and guarantee that once the library opened, the Village of Ilion would provide funding and building maintenance for the library in perpetuity. In 1888, Carrie was elected as the library's first historian and curator, and she became a board member, serving as its president for a time, along with the next lady I'm about to mention. Harriet Russell went by the nickname Hattie, and in 1861 the Russell family moved to Ilion, where her father, Ilion Russell, found employment at Remington Arms and later started his own lumber company. When our library founder, Clarence Siemens, offered to build a public library for the village of Ilion after the school library that was previously open to the public burned down in a fire in 1891, Harriet's father was a superintendent of construction works. He was the person that physically built the library. Harriet graduated from Ilion Academy in 1873 and lived with her parents at 100 Otsego Street, what we now know today as the Witter Hendricks Funeral Home. After graduating, Harriet became a teacher and principal for the intermediate department at Ilion. In 1890, she left teaching to pursue other interests. She came from a wealthy family, so she wasn't concerned with working to earn a living wage. Instead, she went on a 5-month trip to California with her father and friends and made a travel journal that we have in our history room at the library. We don't have a photo of Harriet, but this is an image of her signature from the first page of that travel journal. When she returned home, she organized the Ilion Travelers Club that included 32 local women. She served as its president from 1908 until 1910 and aimed to offer learning opportunities to its members by sharing their travel stories during presentations they held twice a month. In 1891, after that fire at the school library, she appealed to the Ilion Alumni Association to create an independent public library for the village of Ilion. They appointed her to the library committee and worked with Clarence Siemens to help build the library and raise over $6,000 to help stock it with books. When the library officially opened on October 27, 1893, the village board appointed Harriet Russell as president of our very first library board of trustees. She served on the board for 37 years before leaving due to her declining health. Aside from helping set up our library, Harriet Russell helped locate and provide housing for low-income retired teachers. She also helped start the Old Ladies' Home or Mohawk Homestead that Carrie Richardson supported. Harriet served on their board of trustees for 32 years. She was also a member of a local missionary society and a member of the Ilion Shakespeare Club and the Daughters of the American Revolution, or DAR. And last but not least for this video is Anna Perkins. Perkins was born in Hannibal, New York, and that's where she spent most of her life. She graduated from Oswego Normal School in the 1860s and went on to become a teacher at Ilion. She taught for 25 years. Following the 1891 fire that destroyed the school library, the Ilion Alumni Association approached her and appointed Perkins as our very first librarian at the Ilion Free Public Library. During her time with us, she advocated for using the Dewey Decimal System in our library and pushed cataloging efforts for our circulating collections. Two of the images here are from an 1894 newspaper clipping from our history room that displays part of a library report, including some statistics about how many volumes were on our shelves in our early days, how many library patrons we were serving, and the types of library materials that were circulating at the time. Anna Perkins worked as both our first librarian and as the library director for 21 years. During her career, she set the standards for our library, and our reports show how the collections grew over time under her leadership. She was described as, quote, a most excellent librarian who laid the foundations for her successors. Once the Ilion Free Public Library officially opened, Anna Perkins tried to make it a welcoming place for everyone to use and enjoy. Towards the end of her career, she retired and returned home to Hannibal, New York, where she passed away on March 19, 1924. All our staff at the Ilion Library are thankful to Anna Perkins, Harriet Russell, Carrie Richardson, their families, and all the other members of our community that helped give us our start and set a precedent for us to learn from and continue growing as we continue offering space, materials, and programming for everyone to enjoy. We hope you enjoyed this series and learned a little more about some of Ilion's historically significant women. If anyone has any questions or wants to know more about anything we mentioned in this series, contact us or pay us a visit at the library. We love hearing from you and we're happy to help. I want to give a shout out to our historian, Mike Dissetel, and staff member Cheyenne Aney for all their help collaborating on the research for this video series with me. If you're curious and want to know more about our library, go check out our other videos on our channel. Before we wrap up, I want to remind everyone to like, share, and subscribe if you like this video and want to get notifications when we post more content. Make sure to follow us on social media for updates as well. I'm Lauren Robinson, signing off, and I'll see you next time. Bye!